The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittenden. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
I've moved house and the whole thing's fucked, isn't it?
Where have you moved to?
Sandringham.
Ooh, nice. So you've moved out of the world famous Grey Lynn flat with 4 other people for $1.7 million. That's gone now, is it?
It has gone for us.
Nice,
I
man.
no longer at home in Grey Lynn.
You don't feel at home at Grey Lynn?
I did not feel. I've lived in Grey Lynn for like 10 years.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I no longer felt at home there.
How
it was
come?
when my neighbour built a pool. I was like, this is the final straw. These are not my people.
Just too much wealth?
Too much wealth. It's like exclusively white, and there is just so much money kicking around. I was like,
I can remember when I was a teenager, 300,000 years ago, that Ponsonby and those areas, those villas in town, often where migrants came from the Pacific Islands, that's where they got put, for want of a better word, because they were kind of the cheap inner city. No one wants to be there. Ponsonby Rugby Club was pretty rough, you know, and those same houses now are $3 to $7 million. So you can see what happens when people understand being close to a CBD has value.
there is a unique unfairness about that as well, because all the people who should have made money off of that didn't. You know what I mean?
Crazy. But Sandringham's lovely. I like Sandringham a lot. It's a nice little area.
Yeah, I am the problem now. I am the gentrification now. It's awesome. It's so nice.
What's the living situation? Have you bought? Are you renting?
Renting. So it's just me and my wife and my dog in this place, which is a refreshing change of pace after being married for 3 years.
Very good.
To not have flatmates. You know?
Is this
It's
like
kind of nice?
Is this like the first time for a long time? No flatmates.
Yeah, this is the first time ever. Oh, it's ringing me.
Wow.
Oh, someone's ringing me. It's Reese Matthewson.
Ugh.
Should I take it? Should I put him on speaker?
Yeah, go put him on speakerphone. Tell him he's on our podcast.
Reese. Oh my God.
It's pocket dial.
Hey, Reese.
Hey, are you at home?
I am at home. I'm actually just recording You're on a podcast at the moment. I've got you on speakerphone with the Department of Conversation with Pat.
Oh, great.
Do you want?
Hey, well, it's good to be here. Hey, you're the house at the back, eh?
Yeah, that's right at the back.
Cool. I've just left something by your door.
Oh, how mysterious!
Have a good podcast.
Thank you so much.
All right, catch you later.
Appreciate you. Thanks, Reese.
Bye.
I'm getting the feeling there could be a housewarming gift in. If you literally just moved in, maybe.
I have no idea what that is. Genuinely have no idea.
Do you want to go say this could be like an exclusive? You could do we could do an unboxing and unwrapping and a happy housewarming all on one pod. That means we'll get billions of views.
Is that what that means?
I don't know.
Is that genuinely what happens with unboxing?
You know, people do unwrappings and they've massive websites that, because they do that. Anyway, so
It's
nice.
for desirable products. It's for the new Samsung. You know, it's not for whatever Reese has just dropped me off, which in all likelihood could be a lovely plant.
Nice. Well, that's nice. Nice for the house. So does it feel different to be in your own place like that? Does it feel more grown up?
Yeah, dude. It's do you know what it has done? Is it solidified the struggle is real. The battle for getting people their own houses and the importance of that. It's really hit home to me that is a real thing and it's important. And I think when you're in your 30s, I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation to like want to have your own house, to start a family and whatnot. I think that is a fine thing to desire.
Yeah. And you said wife, eh? So partner is wife, officially married?
Yes. We've been married for a hot minute. I wanna say.
So is that part of the plan? It's like, okay, it's time to grow up. We got to get some little bats along the way and off we go. Is this part of that kind of 5-year plan, for want of a less wanky sounding term?
What are baby bats called? Do you know?
I was
how you have beers.
It's interesting where you get your reference point, because I was thinking a very small cricket bat. That's what I visioned when I said a little bat.
Yeah. Like a backyard cricket bat.
Yeah, maybe.
Would be my brain.
So that's part of the plan, though? This is the get the house, grow the family, grow up.
Dude, got the dog, got the wife, in pursuit of the white picket fence. spawn, sire some young. Yeah.
You said that you have an appreciation now of that sort of lifestyle. What has happened? I mean, did you investigate buying, or is that like just out of the realms of possibility, living where you want to live?
You want to know something? I'm loath to bring this up because it sort of blows up the personal brand in some comedy that I do. My wife and I are actually building a house at the moment in Onehunga. So the first house that we're going to have, our first home, will be a built house, a new house.
That is very cool.
On someone's backyard that we paid a tremendous amount of money for, and it's such a small piece of land that we had to get special concessions from the council to tell us it was okay to put a house on there.
So therefore, the next question is, little house, do you have the whole conversation around, really, we're going to build this house, we're going to be there for 10, 15 years, we can only have one kid? Like, is the house appropriate for a growing family once you go down that path as well?
It's not a big house, if that's the question. There's like probably room for a kid, maybe a kid and a half. So we could have one full child and then one that's just like very...
legless.
Yeah, maybe missing a couple limbs, not very mobile, can entertain itself very well, like in a tight space.
Yeah.
A Harry Potter child would just sort of tuck it under the stairs.
Yeah. Oh, that's very exciting, though. So the first place you'll own will be a brand spanking turnkey.
Dude, yes. And I'm very aware that, most people can't do it because of money, but it is the thing that we presumably need to kind of work towards, right? More people, we need to build more houses. I think I'm the first person to say that in this long-running housing crisis, but if it were up to me, I think the plan is we need to build some more houses.
Did you investigate other options? Did you investigate going? Because I mean, in Auckland especially, the shortage is land. You've obviously found a small section, a half section, whatever. A lot of people are saying that the answer to that is to go up. More apartments and that kind of stuff.
Yep, totally looked at that. Went to open homes for houses. This is demoralizing. It's crazy. The whole process is so demoralizing and expensive, both time and money. Obviously, you got to get builders reports and stuff every time. It's just like, it's untenable, but I've been saying that for a long time. So maybe it is tenable and I just need to shift my focus. But I don't know how we've been in this bad situation that's been getting steadily worse for no shit, like 15 years. People were saying it was bad 15 years ago, and it is factors worse.
It's always relative, though, isn't it? I mean, I remember my sister, who's 10 years older than me, bought her first house in sort of Mount Roskill-ish way, and she had to buy a half house because they couldn't afford, she couldn't afford to get a house. So she bought a house with a friend, I should say, not a half house, but her and a mate bought a house together. Then after 5 years, they sold that and, went and got their own places. But they couldn't afford it then, and that house now is probably 1.3, 1.5, and they would have paid it and sold it for $130,000 sort of thing back in the day. So, but it was still relative to that time. They were still like, we can't afford this, we can't do this, and it seems to be because incomes haven't gone up that much, but people seem to find a way. You find a way. If you can't afford it, you get a boarder, or I don't know.
I think if people find a way who we hear from. I think we're not hearing from a lot of people who are fucking out. Like, I think our homeless population is exploding. I think there's a lot of people who are like part of one of the sort of grimmest, economic groupings that you hear about, I think, is this class that are often called the working poor. Yeah. Who are just like slogging their guts out, entertaining nothing. Like no accumulation of wealth, no betterment of their circumstances, struggling to provide for their kids and their family and whatnot, but fucking working. Yeah. Yeah. I've read some books, Pat. I've become a bit of a socialist.
Or the other way they reference them is the underemployed. Like you're working full time or close to it, but still don't have enough to survive off.
It's a weird word though, because underemployed sounds to me like you just can't get enough hours, going. But these people I'm describing are working, 45 hours, and simply housing is so expensive that it soaks up all of that income.
The thing that's confused me often about housing and being able to afford to buy a house, and I don't know if this is something the government could change or it just needs to be the banks could change, is it was always confusing to me if when I was younger you'd go to a bank and you'd go, in those days we were paying $500 a week for rent, but we could buy this house and pay $350 a week for a mortgage, and they'd just be like, no, because you need X, Y, Z, especially you need 20% deposit or whatever it was. But the equation seems so simple. If we've been living in this other house for 2 or 3 years, paying $450 a week, and we need to pay $350 a week, why can't we just figure that out?
It's a good question. I've got another question, Pat.
Yeah.
What's your hat? You got a Redskin hat on.
No. Cleveland Indians, not Redskins.
Okay.
The Cleveland Indians. And my understanding is, if you find it offensive, I can change it. My understanding is the Cleveland baseball team have an agreement, an accord with the local tribe that they're in, and it's been given the local tribe's blessing to still be able to use it and use that term.
Huh.
You not like it? You're not a fan?
Not a fan. I don't know. I'm not a fan. I'm not a. I find it.
I want no barriers in our conversation. So how about the Houston instead? Is that all right? Better?
That is a real mark of a gifted conversationalist, to be like, you know what? This is going to keep being a barrier. I'm going to remove it.
Or it could go New York if you wanted to. I mean, just you could pick.
Has anyone ever described you as a non-fuckwit version of Bomber?
People often have. I more than.
Has anyone seen you and Bomber in the same room at the same time?
I have. I used to visit with him on Sunday nights when he was working on Channel Z, and I was going upstairs to work on War FM. So yes, the people who worked on his show.
Your name isn't an anagram of Martin Bradbury by any chance.
He's not a fan of me. He doesn't like me very much at all. And
he doesn't like anything.
Yeah.
It makes me so sad. For the uninitiated, I've got a very weird feeling that I've been on the show once before, and we might have talked about Bomber then as well. But I've got a terrible memory, so I'll say it anyway. But I grew up listening to that talkback show that he ran on Channel Z. A talkback show for youth is such a good idea. And I remember it being pretty fantastic. I was about 11 at the time. But the guy who ran it now, Bomber, is like, he's metastasized into this crazy creature of the media. It's he's been an interesting human being to watch over time, that's for sure.
It's an interesting way you term it, that he's metastasized. I wonder if, not just him in particular, I as I was down here in my office, kind of hanging out, doing some work, waiting for you to come on, I was reading the latest Manuel Miranda story. Have you got the lowdown on that?
I'm not.
He's apparently he's evil now.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What's he been doing?
He's a colorist, apparently.
In what way?
Well, his new In the Heights movie doesn't have a completely 100% authentic and accurate representation of Washington Heights in the cast. So it's a Latino movie for a Latino area full of Latino people, but many of the people who live in the real Washington Heights are Afro-Latino, so they're darker skinned. And so now he's being hauled over the coals because he's a colorist.
Okay.
So the man who turned the founding fathers into minorities and was lauded by people for that, for showing these people as an inaccurate representation of what they were. In other words, they didn't look like that in Hamilton, is now being drawn over the coals for doing kind of the same thing, for not showing a completely accurate representation of the people for In the Heights. And he's a colorist. My point I was going to be is it this individual that's metastasized, or is it the whole sort of media world, and there's just slots to fill now where have you metastasized, or has the world around you changed so much you're just fitting into that gap? I don't know.
It's a good question. I tuned out to Bomber for a long time, so I don't know. It's sort of harder to tell if he changed or if the world changed around him. Because what I thought was impressive when I was 11 was also, Cop and Co. But I'm less impressed by Cop and Co nowadays. So I too changed.
And what now? Was what now impressive when you were 11?
Yeah, of course. Anything on television was. Television used to hold a real, mark of magic and prestige in my mind, which is gone now.
Why is
it? You see any TV show get made, you're like, oh wow.
Right. So once the curtain is pulled up and you see what's happening behind the scenes, it's like
when you see what's under the skirt, you're like, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Not great.
Yeah, no, look, just to finish that kind of part of the conversation, maybe, yes, I have been asked if I was him numerous times, probably partly from the way I look, but apparently I sound a bit like him as well. I have a similar...
Yeah. You don't agree?
I can see why people would say that. I don't know about the sound like. You know how you don't listen to yourself in your own head? You sound different in your own head? So I don't maybe see that connection, but the other one I do, you know, big guy. Now I've got the beard as well. I didn't have the beard when I was working in radio, but big guy with a beard who has some opinions and works in talk radio. I get it.
Yeah. There's not a lot of people in New Zealand as well, so we like to join the dots.
Yeah.
And Pat, we got to put you in one of these pots.
Yeah.
Pot is going to be the bomber pot.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, I mean, I'm okay. I'm okay with being put in a pot. I mean, you know, I think the other thing, I was thinking about this Lin-Manuel Miranda thing, is when you get put in a pot, the problem is you can never live up to the pot you get put into. And I was going to
get right past the Lin-Manuel Miranda thing, but I think even the version of events you're giving me, which I'm going to assume is like a kind of straw man argument, which I totally get as a broadcaster. You've got to simplify things for the understanding of the audience in a short amount of time. But I don't think it's the same to equate him turning the founding fathers of the framers of America into minorities as underrepresenting an area which he's claiming to represent, which is a minority area. I think they're two different things.
I agree that they're different things, but I do find it interesting and slightly ironic that the same people who are saying it's fantastic that these people don't look like they're supposed to is now saying you're evil because these people don't look like they're supposed to. I think there's an irony there, if nothing else.
I don't think that's irony, because I think they're totally different things, because it's about power. Like the framers were white men, so portraying them as black men who are now starting to have a bit of power in America for the first time in 300 years is like a novel and cool thing to do. But by misrepresenting a minority, you know, as another minority, when you're claiming to do this big thing for a minority group, that's, you know, I think that's a different thing.
It's a really interesting way to look at it, though. Misrepresenting a minority, a Latino movie with Latino actors telling a Latino story, but maybe not exactly the same Latino.
Yeah, well, it's in the, you know, we're in New Zealand, so maybe we don't quite get the depth of importance afforded to the different racial groups that he's laying claim to represent.
I don't
know, man.
He's come out and apologized.
I'm hearing about this for the first time. Yeah, I think he's a dude who listens. Do you know Lin-Manuel Miranda? I've got to say, I think he still follows me on Twitter, which is wild. He listens to Weird Idea. Yeah. He's like my biggest claim to fame on Twitter. Yeah, he still follows me to this day. That guy's following less than 4,000 people, and he's followed by 3.5 million. And I'm in that elite club. And am I bearing down on him, or are you? I don't even know what side of this conversation either of us are on. I've had a few beers, Pat, in the sun with a mate of mine, Paul Douglas, and it's been bloody lovely. But I feel like I'm not operating it with 100% faculties, you know?
That's interesting. You get someone like him because he's iconic. I mean, what he's done is amazing. You know,
Paul Douglas, I totally agree. Completely underrated New Zealand comedian. He's had his first outing on 7 Days recently. Absolutely stormed it.
Do you ever think about people who follow you, because your podcast is incredibly successful overseas? You've traveled to Los Angeles and done live versions of your podcast. So, you know, a podcast like nothing else coming out of New Zealand, really. Do you ever think about connecting with some of these people who have higher profiles in America who may follow you because of the podcast? But slip a DM in there now and then?
Mate, if you think that I haven't gotten drunk and DM Lin-Manuel Miranda because he follows me, you're out of your damn mind. The person we tried to tee up with the most was Patrick Schwarzenegger, who's Arnold Schwarzenegger's son, Guy, who co-hosted the podcast, co-created the podcast with me. We've both got his face tattooed on us because we kind of lost a bet. So we've both got him tattooed on us. And he follows Guy on Instagram. And so we've tried to tee up with a beer with him multiple times, but it never quite works, unfortunately.
Where is the tattoo?
On my thigh, on my left leg. It's a pretty sweet tattoo.
That's a commitment to losing a bet, man.
Well, you know, you got to find a way to raise some money from the punters. You got to have the appropriate stakes. And I think marking your body, you know, impermanently is the way to go.
What would be important to me is to know what you would have got if you had won the bet. What would the flip side have been?
Well, I say bet. It was, listen, we'll come. This was the first trip we did. We want to come to LA and do a live show. We can't afford to. If you contribute this amount of money into a fund, we will both get tattoos and fly over and do the show, because then you will have paid for our trip. But then the tattoos cost way more than I thought they were going to. So we got them done on Sunset, and they, from memory, they were about like $300 or $400 US a piece, which is, you know,
$500.
Like 100, New Zealand dollars combined. You know,
well,
a lot of money.
While we're talking about it, we should let people know as well. The worst idea of all time. There it is. I see you're doing podcasts and trees now. Has something happened to the budget?
So normally the format of the podcast is that we watch and review the same movie every week for a year. So we watched Grown Ups 2 for a year, kept reviewing that. We've done Sex and the City 1 and 2, and a Zac Efron movie called We Are Your Friends. And then we decided to change it up for this most recent season, and we're watching Softcore Pornography, the Manuel series.
I can remember that showing on Friday night on a Sky channel here in New Zealand.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's got specific cultural, relevance, I think, for men of a certain age in New Zealand who watch that on Sky One Porn. And so we got like halfway through the season, and it's just so grim to wade through all of the softcore pornography, these poorly made skin flicks, that we decided to go outside and start recording in a park. We were like, what's the opposite of what we're doing right now? In a dark room watching pornography. It's going outside and sitting in a tree and recording in there. So we just started doing a little mini series called Podcast in a Tree, where we just went into a park, and it was lovely.
Do you find now, with the following you've got from the worst idea of all time, that if you do something else like this, or you've done some kind of DVD commentaries as well, that it still gets a really big response and the same people all check it out?
I don't pay like a super close amount of attention to analytics, and I probably should, but I don't, to be honest. But anecdotally, from the feedback we get, because we do read pretty much every single bit of correspondence we get to us. In fact, I would say like every single one that we get, if it hasn't been intercepted by a spam filter, we get it and we read it. They love it. They love the change of pace. They love to hear us not suffering for a change, because the whole point of the podcast is us suffering, which we've been doing for 7 years. So they're like, wow, it's so nice to hear you guys doing okay for 7 short episodes.
I did have a bit of a bone to pick with you, because I saw I think it was an NZ on Screen or something conversation you had, and you talked about Grown Ups 2 being 3% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'll have you know it's currently 8% and a 53% audience score. So I think I get the gist of what you're doing with the show, but to misrepresent it as a 3%er, I don't know if that's particularly fair.
You know that those scores are not set in stone, Pat. They're dynamic. So
maybe the Grown Up 2 movement has heard about what you said, and they've come out against it, to up the numbers or something.
I wouldn't be surprised if people saw, for example, Uncut Gems, and then got an entry into Adam Sandler's back catalogue through there, and are now giving him the benefit of the doubt. And I'm like, no, this isn't a shitty comedy. This is like a meta-analysis of what broad comedy is. I get what he's doing. The biggest, most bankable comedy stars in the world, and they're making a movie that isn't funny. That is so of our time. That's so meta.
He seems to have a pretty strange but pretty good setup, though. It seems to be every year or so, him and his mates find a place to go have a holiday, and they film a movie whilst they're doing it.
Totally.
It's not a bad system.
I've been doing a lot of research on Adam Sandler over the years, as you can imagine, and that is 100. What you've just described is 100% correct.
Oh, is that how it does? Okay.
But I kind of, because the entry point was Grown Ups 2, we were very disdainful in a way, for it and towards Adam Sandler. But the more I learn about that guy, the more I love him. Super hard worker, constantly making stuff, hilariously funny. His most recent special, his Netflix special, was incredible.
Yeah.
Really good. Like, legitimately, hand on heart, super funny, super heartfelt. It was a smash. And at this point, what he's built is this machine to keep a lot of him and his mates and his family and his mates' families paid up and taken over. He's just created this whole Hollywood apparatus to continue to make these films, which are like, are they going to win an Oscar? Probably not, but they get everyone paid. Everyone's in work. I respect the hell out of it. That's cool.
Yeah, that Netflix special was interesting, especially because fairly obvious because his clothes changed every 3 minutes. They were just pulling all the best of the whole series of concerts and stand-up routines and putting it together. And I'm like, well, why not? You know, I mean, a lot of people try and show their continuity by not doing that. And that song he does for Chris Farley is, I don't know how he sings it without kind of almost being in tears every night. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that whole point of him filming a bunch of different, shows that he did and just banging it together and not pretending like it's the same night. It's so refreshing and it's so cool. And I think it takes someone as experienced and good as Adam Sandler to just be like, why though? Why are we faking it all the time?
I think he's
Did you see that Bo Burnham special, by the way, Pat?
Which one?
Just come out. The Bo Burnham special.
Have not.
Called Inside.
No, I have not.
It's I know this is going to sound crazy after the podcast format, but outside of work commitments, I don't watch stuff twice or like read books twice. But I've already seen that special twice, and I've listened to the songs a lot on Spotify. It is very, very, very good.
Wow. What about it? What drew you to it twice?
So Bo Burnham, people might be familiar with him. He is like one of the truly original YouTube stars. He was making videos when he was 17. So this is like, about 17 years ago. Wait, hold on. How old's YouTube? No, 13 years ago, maybe. He was one of the first guys who really was on the platform and made it big with these comedy songs he did as a teenager. And so he's had this interesting comedy career where he does sort of stand-up shows, but he's always a musical comedian, and he's very theatrical and quite erudite. He has had a very public battle with anxiety, which he sort of revealed to the world 5 years ago when he stopped performing because he started getting panic attacks on stage when he was performing to these sold-out, multi-thousand attendees crowds. So he took himself out of there and then was just about to get back into the game, started booking some shows, and the pandemic hit. And he decided to film a special just by himself in a room. And so everything you see in this 90-minute Netflix special of his, he has entirely formulated himself. Not just written and performed it, but filmed it and edited it himself. It's all him. And it's a deeply hilarious and very personal bit of work.
So I'm obviously going to need to go and have a look at it, but for people who are watching and not listening, there's the image for it off Netflix right now. There's the whatever they'd call that, the poster they've got up for it. Bo Burnham Inside, hour and a half. That's pretty long for a comedy special as well. If it's sort of stand up in that. So
and is breaking all the rules.
So you do the podcast about terrible films. Have you guys ever had the conversation of once in a while putting something in there, like doing a review of stuff that you love and that would draw you to watch twice when you don't watch things twice?
That's fine, but it's not funny. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing funny. That's just a movie review at that point.
Yeah.
And I think that bill is, paid. Some other people are in that slot who are a lot more competent than us.
So you're not in pain. You're singing Bo Burnham's praises. You're not in pain watching his stuff.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No way. Nah, just pure enjoyment, pure unadulterated enjoyment. What have you watched recently, Pat? Can I ask that? Can I throw a question? Have you watched or read any books or anything? Something that's really spun your gears?
I have just started rewatching Breaking Bad.
Oh, I watched that for the very first time recently, the whole way through.
My partner,
what do people say it's true? It's very good.
Yeah, my partner's never seen it. And I watched it long enough ago that I can remember some pretty big story plot lines, but I've forgotten a lot of the minutiae. So it's not like watching. It's funny, you say you never watch things twice. I think I've got enough of a Swiss cheese brain that given enough distance, I can watch something a second time and enjoy it.
Do you reckon that's done that to our brains?
It's what?
Do you think the internet has done that to our brains? An inability to retain things? We're just being We're bombarding constantly our brains with stimulus and cultural products that we can't hold on to them anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if it's for me, the internet. I think I'm, well, maybe, because I was about to say I constantly have got content going in, and the reason I have content constantly going is because of the internet. So yes, okay, I can see that could be a connection. I wonder if, even though we only use a small amount of our brain, there's only a certain amount of stuff you can hold, and I seem pretty seems pretty easy for me to be able to retain something for a long time and then let it go. So when I was doing talkback, I used to be very, very good and very up with a lot of information, especially political information, to be able to have the conversations to and froing on air. But, 6 months later, if I didn't still have like my notes or read up on it recently, all of it's gone. Like all of it is gone.
I think good. I think that's good. What I've been thinking about recently is what technology is doing is it's forcing us to retain all of that stuff. I think it's very natural to go through life and have certain experiences happen and then you forget, and that's good. You're not supposed to retain everything. But, what digital technology does is it infallibly retains these memories of things, the photographs, the video, the everything. Every bit of data is just held there forever on the internet. And I think that's bad. I think you're supposed to forget. I think it's part of like growth and growing up and stuff. But it allows you to become a new person when you can forget who you were.
When you asked me then what have I watched recently, I was thinking as well, what would I watch twice? Like, if I give distance to something, I can watch something good again. But what have I watched twice within cooey of one another? And the last thing I can think of that I've done that with is that documentary. I think it's called Jim and Andy, and the Andy Kaufman documentary. I think I might have even watched that 3 times in the space of a month. It just blew my brain completely.
And have you seen, so that's about Jim Carrey when he portrays Andy Kaufman in Man in the Moon, right? Have you seen Man in the Moon? Man on the Moon?
You know what, I've seen it, but I haven't seen it since watching the documentary, which is something I would quite like to do.
I haven't seen either of those movies, but I've heard, based on the one that you've seen twice, Jim and Andy, that Jim Carrey was a very difficult man to work with during that process because he was so in the zone. Well,
what do they call it? I was going to call it meta. It's not meta when they won't come out of character. What's that called?
When they come out?
No, when they won't come out of character, even when they call.
When you're going method acting.
Method, yeah, I said meta. Method acting. He basically, for people who haven't seen it, he sort of went a version of method. He doesn't call it that. He basically says, Andy Kaufman came to me and enveloped my body for that time. But he's not a method actor. I think when he's doing, The Mask or whatever, he came out of character, obviously. So he was really difficult to work with, and he tells stories about, having to speak to the director as Jim Carrey rather than as Andy Kaufman, and kind of going, well, I could have a talk to Andy, and I could just come along and pretend to be Andy rather than Andy kind of coming into me, and the director kind of going in a very unhappy way, no, this is the only way it's going to work. Let's just keep pushing through. So yeah, it sounds like he was really difficult to work with, but it sounds like, I don't know.
So Jim Carrey was sort of treating Andy Kaufman as like this third entity in the room.
Yeah, he was kind of going, well, I could have a talk to him. I could come to the set tomorrow and pretend to be him. And the director was like, no, we must get this finished. So, yeah, so it sounds like it was difficult to work with, but perhaps the difficulties that he brought gave the performance that he did. And I think he's not one of those people that would appear who does a method acting in anything else. So I don't know if that's an industry issue he has. It probably was just an issue for that movie.
Ace Ventura, I reckon he went methods.
That'd be hilarious, wouldn't it? You know what I thought the other day?
Animals solving a lot of crimes.
I was talking to someone else about method acting and how utterly wanky it feels to me, because you never hear about someone on stage, like in a stage show, being method. Imagine that you're doing a 1-year run of, playing some figure out of Shakespeare. No method acting happens when you're doing stage work, only in the movies. So because it's bullshit. That's bollocks.
Maybe it's the first of all, maybe some do. I genuinely don't know. I don't know if stage actors never do it or what. But I was just thinking of people who are in musicals, because performers who do musical theatre, you could be in a run that goes, fuck, it blows my mind, man. there are people who do musicals and they'll be in a cast and they'll do 8 shows a week. So they'll do like, one, maybe Monday's dark, but Tuesday through Sunday, they're doing shows every night and they'll do 2 on Friday and 2 on Saturday. And they might do that for a year or maybe even longer. Can you imagine? Like how does that not drive people insane to do something every single day and some days twice for that amount of time? Like, I don't get that. But maybe that's why the method thing doesn't apply for stage acting, because the seasons are longer or something. So there's like a less, it would actually change who you are. But then a lot of seasons are way smaller than the shooting of a movie. So Pat, I don't know. I'm not Ace Ventura. I can't solve this crime.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I remember when I was doing a little bit of stage work, I used to work and do kind of theatre sports and stuff at the same time. And I remember thinking how I loved doing theatre sports because it's literally different every single night, or improv comedy as they now call it, because theatre sports is a trademark. But yeah, I used to think, imagine. I mean, you can imagine doing a run of a couple of weeks of a stage show, fine. But yeah, that long thing,
Do you know who owns the trademark for theatre sports?
No, I don't. But we had to change the name in a company because we use the word theatre sports. But I don't know who actually owns it.
Wow, that seems nuts to me. There's an industry where trademarks shouldn't be, making a big hiss and a roar.
Yeah. No, there was something to do. There was something to do with the word being owned by someone, and the group was called Theatre Sports Auckland, which is now, I don't know what it's called now, but it had to change its name for. Or maybe it was also to do with theatre sports is actually a stylistic kind of series of games, whereas improv is different to that. It's just improvised.
Okay, I've found it. I'm on a website called trademarklight.com, and there seems to be an application accepted in Australia on February the 13th, 96 for the term theatre sports.
Wow.
It is a registered protected trademark by Impro Australia Incorporated, who are based out of New South Wales. So I'm guessing this is a Sydney thing. That just seems crazy to me.
That seems crazy as well, because you said 96, yeah? Because I remember in 1990 and 91, 92 going along to the Maidment Theatre in the Auckland University and watching Craig Parker and watching these people from Shortland Street and watching Oliver Driver and Joel Tobeck and these guys playing theatre sports. So theatre sports existed before 96. I wonder why there's not a trademark until then.
Mate, I'm not a lawyer, but if I was, I reckon I'd know. This is weird. You can pay $300 to get access to the trademark or something. I've fallen down one of those web rabbit holes.
Do you have those internet do you have YouTube rabbit holes? Like, mate, what's in your YouTube algorithm rabbit hole that people will be like, because I've got crazy ones.
I love conspiracy theories.
Oh yeah,
I really do. And I've got a I never really made it that good, but I've got a little joke about that I do on stage about how conspiracy theories have been ruined in the modern age because they started, leaking into the real world and having real world ramifications. Whereas back in the day, conspiracy theories were just fun thought experiments. They were just people tossing a lot of crazy ideas around, and they didn't really affect anyone in particular. And that's what I'm a big fan of, just sort of, imagining. Like, what's my favorite conspiracy theory?
It's got to be the flat Earth. Isn't flat Earth always the most favorite?
I don't think any serious person believes it, though. I've never thought that there was a real thing that anyone actually believed. I think it was just a fun meme, but I'm not convinced anyone genuinely believed it.
I tell you what, I got into, not from my own personal belief, but got into the flat Earth world a little bit, spoke to a couple of flat earthers, and I thought it was all a bit of fun and not a problem. And those are the same people who kind of don't believe there's a moon landing and all that kind of stuff. But then when the Christchurch massacre happened, sorry to go dark, but the same people that believe the flat Earth started talking about false flags that didn't really happen. And that kind of made me go, oh, okay, so this is kind of a harmless sort of thing over the side, but where it then leads into with these other people, now they're the same people who thinks there's vaccines in microchips and vaccines, and they're not going to get themselves vaccinated. So I did.
Could be wrong, but I think there's that classic thing of causation. What is it?
There's not necessarily correlation.
Yeah, I think the people who gravitate towards a belief of just rejecting reality will do that on multiple fronts. So they're like, nah, this virus is fake. They're trying to inject us to get a tracking chip into our skin. And they're the same people who will be like, nah, we never landed on the moon. But I don't think the moon landing faked conspiracy. I'm a fan of that one because that seems harmless. And the sort of, evidence about it, it's interesting. It's interesting to look at that stuff and see where those guys are coming from. It is absurd and they're absolutely wrong. But I like the fact that they're doing a lot of harmless research to try and prove that thing.
It's a bit the same as the flat Earth. The flat Earth, they were doing harmless researches to prove their stuff.
It's not really affecting anyone as far as I know. The anti-vaxxers, that's, sort of where I would draw a line, because it's like you're no longer engaging in a fun flight of fancy. You're actually engaging in, you're refusing to reckon with the real world, and it has ramifications for those around you. I'm all for people making their own choices and stuff, but you've got to accept the fact that there are people who, for example, cannot get the vaccine and need to be protected against this new killer virus that's rocking around. So everyone kind of needs to band together and do their part to form a society. We live in a society, for crying out loud.
Have you had the jab, or are you too young and healthy for all that stuff?
I haven't had it yet. I don't think I'm eligible, but I'm on a list. I'm going to get it as soon as I can.
I got it the other day because and really it was because I was able to. I just asked my doctor, and the doctor went, "Oh yeah," and put me through. No. And I see that there
Did you get any effects?
First jab, nothing, literally kind of nothing. Second jab, my whole right arm, it felt like I'd been at the gym all day curling, probably 3 days later, just achy down my arm, joints achy in my arms, lethargic. Nothing like you've heard the worst case scenarios to be people kind of feeling like they've got the flu or anything, but I could tell. I could tell something there. And actually, to be honest with you, I had a headache for 4 or 5 days afterwards, but I feel like that might have been a coincidence, not necessarily from the jab.
But maybe not.
The
thing is, it's having an effect. So there's your body is doing something. That means it's working because your immune system is kicking into gear and doing stuff, and that's got a lot of ancillary effects to it.
I feel like we're not doing so well with the vaccines in New Zealand, and I feel like the attitude towards it is fairly average. I mean, it seems that perhaps, I was talking to someone the other day about how we were quite compliant when it came to Jacinda telling us to go inside, which gave us the opportunity to, kind of kick this thing in the balls and be pretty good for the last 18 months. Whereas places like America, who are the least compliant, they're like, fuck you, my freedom is my whatever, had the worst of it. But now it seems like America, who I think are up to about 45% vaccinated, because they're all about something like that. Or maybe that's 45% have had at least one shot. But because it's all about individualism, they're like, I will get. And because they've seen 600,000 deaths, it's like they've seen the effects of what it could be. Whereas we've been safe sitting in our bubble. And I think that kind of compliance thing helped us at the start and might be harming us a bit at the end. Whereas in America, that individualism thing really harmed them at the start, but it might be helping them now. Because obviously we have to open up again at some stage properly, or else we're going to stay this little isolated bubble, and we will get one of these variants that'll come through and just wreak havoc.
Totally, man. I mean, the Delta variant that's ripping through at the moment is pretty scary stuff. I've got to admit, I'm super tuned out to everything, really. I feel like I've been very disconnected from the news cycle for a while now, but I really haven't been paying attention to the COVID stuff. And maybe I've actually swung too far the other way, but I don't know. I formerly in my life, I've gone through cycles of being a bit of a news junkie, and I just don't know if it was very helpful. But with the COVID stuff, I should be more tuned in. The question I was going to ask, though, is do you think it's that individualism versus compliance thing, or is it maybe a case of America faced the realities of what happens when you don't do what you're supposed to do, and saw all their family and friends, get hospitalized and die. And they're like, well, fuck, sign me up to whatever helps with this. And we haven't seen those effects.
Well, that's I was talking about the comfort. We feel comfortable here in New Zealand. We feel comfortable and safe. So if we're comfortable and safe, we don't need to do anything about it. So I mean, obviously I don't know, but my gut kind of tells me, my gut looks to America and looks how, even though there's a lot of noise about people complaining and not taking the vaccine in America, when you look at the numbers, they're taking it in vast quantities. Right. And I think that there will be, obviously, because they've seen, 600,000 of their fellow citizens died, let alone however many got it as well.
So this is like when Trump got elected, those secret Trump voters who told all the pollsters, no, I'm not voting for Trump, and then got in and voted for Trump.
Well, that's like that nutty woman, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is now refusing to say whether she's been vaccinated, and that's because obviously she's been vaccinated, and she just doesn't want to tell her conspiracy theory nutwing MAGA supporters that she's taken, Bill Gates's microdose. So,
you got to be honest, eh? That's the thing. Like, I've got a certain amount of respect for even people who are fucking out there who really believe what they're touting, but hypocrisy. There is a reserved area of hell for the hypocrites, the people who are just telling people one thing and doing another. That Marjorie, what's her name? Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I think that's right. Yeah, the one who basically has been saying getting a vaccine is like the Holocaust. She's retracted that, but not by much.
She's she's sort of the maximum, I hope. She's the high watermark of what we will see happen in the modern era. Fascinating figure, though.
But don't you think everyone said that about, Trump, and there seems to be an incline. I mean, when you look and have a look at what's happening with the GOP at the moment, he's still in charge. And the GOP is staying in lockstep with him, and they won't go against him en masse. Some are, as individuals, but en masse they're staying with him because they know that his message is appealing.
Does the audience know who the GOP are and what that stands for?
The Republicans.
It's the grand old party, the Republican Party in America.
The right-wingers. You can't even say the National Party of America. They're probably more the ACT Party, probably further to the right of ACT in many of them because they don't have the same split of left to right like we do, even though they think they do. But, he's still in charge. He's already talking about he'll pick the candidates that'll win in the midterms. So, if he comes back in 2024... she might be the start. She might not be the finish. She might be the first of many.
Who do you reckon they're going to run?
For the GOP? Republicans? Well, if I was to have to put I think I'd be pretty happy to put a wager on it now that Biden won't be going again and that Harris will be going for president. Mm-hmm. Although I think if they can wheel him out for 4 more years, it's much more likely an incumbent will get back in. But DeSantis down in Florida, they'll probably bring out their regulars, the Ted Cruzes, those guys of the world.
Marco Rubio.
Yeah, Rubio. Those guys will come out. But I tell you what, if he's still around, and I say that just because everyone talks about how unhealthy he is, if he's still around, Trump will want to go again in 2024. There's no question.
He'll live forever, dude. He's one of those guys who will just keep going until he's 200 years old by sheer force of will. Some people believe in themselves so much that the rules of biology and physics no longer apply. They just create this black magic bubble around them, which propels them into immortality.
I reckon
Donald J. Trump is one of them.
There's a very funny little part that in one of the Simpsons episodes when Mr. Burns goes for a checkup, and he finishes his checkup, and he asks the doctor, "Am I doing well?" And the doctor basically says, "You're the sickest person on the face of the planet. You have everything." He said, "But ironically, when you have everything, it all seems to cancel each other out." And
keeping each
yeah. So maybe that's Trump. Maybe he has everything.
All of his syndromes and viruses are working in tandem to prop him up in perfect synchronicity.
And they can't get through.
It's a disgusting thing to watch, but it's working for him. Yeah, I would be so disappointed if they just... Because I think you're right. I don't know who else they would run, but I think it will be the same old regular peeps that we've seen every time before, which just sucks because it just means more and more people exit the whole dog and pony show. It's like, oh, this old bullshit again. This person doesn't represent me whatsoever.
And if people do exit the same old dog and pony show, that gives Trump more of a chance to get reelected. I don't think he will.
The trouble is like the more people exit from politics and don't see themselves in politics and don't see normal people like doing normal, representing debates that they actually care about in everyday life and stuff. When people lose their faith in that, that's when shit falls over, because you're like, wow, this is supposed to be the people in charge and they're absurd and they're not representing my interests or me whatsoever. They're only representing themselves and a very small number of their friends who already have a lot of money and power. So that's when you get real kickoff events. It's because everyone's so disenchanted with the absurdity of what this, so-called House of Representatives is doing.
Well, and then
New Zealand, we should always continue to point out all the bad things that are happening, especially for those in power, and hold them to account. But we do have a pretty uniquely accessible collection of people who we can at least petition for our interests and our concerns. They're pretty accessible.
The other thing that I think, and it's so interesting that people have short memories. It seems like in America they've got goldfish memories. The evils of the right, my words, and what they do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then Biden gets in, and I think, last week there was 29 bombing raids into Syria, some horrifically high number.
They're illegal, right?
Yeah, totally. So Biden's committing war crimes as we speak, as this left-wing president of the United States of America. So, that makes me look to what we do here in New Zealand and kind of go, it's quite nice just to be little and at the bottom of the world.
Yeah, totally. That's why I think, and you may disagree with this, which I fully respect because I totally understand the other side of it, but the argument of we shouldn't be doing that much on climate change because we can't make a very big impact. New Zealand's role as a little country is that we can take big swings at stuff, I think, and we can be a real leader in things. And I think we've, proven ourselves to be that. And we've kind of been blessed by some very good communicators. A lot of people dislike Jacinda Ardern on the right and the left. And I fully hear what they're saying. But at the end of the day, she's like an undeniably unrivaled human communicator. And it's kind of nice to have one of those people at the helm at least, who's competent at the communication side of things. Not everyone.
I had on Michelle Acourt quite close to the election last year, and she was hilarious. Of Jacinda, she just said, "Why would you replace an exceptional woman with an average man?" And I was just like, that's a pretty good way to perhaps look at it. That was her position, and I thought it was quite a nice way to get it out there.
In a way, yeah. But I'm it's very weird. I've got very old school, views and some of those sorts of things where I'm like, oh man, I kind of do bemoan the popularity contest aspect of it, which I know has always been the case and always will be because humans gravitate towards humans. But I don't bemoan anyone who backs Judith Collins because they legitimately think that a more right-wing economic approach would be better for the country. I disagree with them. I think they're wrong, but I don't bemoan that view at all for people who legitimately hold it. But I do kind of I get a little bit down on the whole personality contest thing because I just, it would be nice if we were operating at a slightly higher level than that. What I mean?
But I think that's the change in society today. I'll come to that in a second. The climate change thing, I agree with you. We should do everything we can to do it. And you're talking about being a little country, and I'm talking about it as well. You think about, women with the vote. You think about in the 80s, the stand against nuclear weapons. Think about things that we did, like stand against apartheid in South Africa. Recently, the banning of assault weapons. I think that they make ripples. Let me put it this way. I'm not trying to sound poetic, but throwing a small, stone into a big river still makes a lot of ripples,
100%.
And I think that's cool.
I think in New Zealand get a lot of international praise. I'm parroting a point that my friend Guy Montgomery made a couple of days ago when we were having a chat, that I think we give ourselves a very salubrious pat on the back because our systems aren't quite as broken as international as other countries' systems. But there's even things like our relationship with the Indigenous people in New Zealand is far from perfect. We've got a long way to go. And I think and hope we are making genuine strides to try and, make progress in that area. But there is a lot, I think, that a lot of countries could look upon and take inspiration from how we're approaching it. You know? I mean, all the awful stuff that's happening in Canada at the moment with the discovery of all the Indigenous children who were, schooled by these Catholic Church state systems. And then they built graveyards into the design of schools because the mortality rate was so high that they knew they would have to deal with all these children's bodies. And that's how they're finding all these corpses now. Like, it's just fucked at a deeply human level. Fucked. And so, all of that to say, we've all got a long way to go. But yeah, New Zealand, I think, has a lot to be sort of proud of. And I think climate change is not one of them at the moment, but we could be that in that area. We could take bigger strides.
I think it's really important to acknowledge the shortcomings, but at the same time celebrate the successes. And I mean, much like how I've said numerous times that no one's saying we're there yet. No one's saying we've handled it right. But compared to many countries, the relationship between the Crown and the Indigenous people in New Zealand is better than most. Not perfect, got a long way to go, but, we're at least a good way down that journey where many countries haven't even started the car yet. And I think it's okay to have, you can hold both sides. We can do better, but we're getting there. We're moving in the right direction.
Everyone should strive to do better, but at least for international countries, maybe I'm thinking Australia, like they could look to some things that we're doing and maybe take some inspiration from that.
Oh, America as well, the Native Americans. I mean,
it's great. Do you know, I've been thinking about that a lot recently. I think very useful, high level academic thinking that's going around the treatment of African Americans as a class over time and what needs to happen now to sort of rectify the inequities in the American society with them. And there's just no conversation about Native Americans that I hear. I guess because there's like a kind of hierarchy of needs that you've got to build up to be able to build an apparatus where you can have loud leaders and public discourse and noisy campaigns and stuff to actually get justice for your people. But just thinking about the atrocities that have been committed against Native Americans and how there's like no talk, in the public discourse about it. Seems crazy. And it seems
there's lots of things in America that seem crazy. I mean, they talk about reparations like it's a dirty word. Whereas it seems to me that, I mean, I used to do this on Talkback on ZB. I'd talk to people who would complain about Waitangi settlements. And I'd go, so if your grandfather had land in Northern Ireland and the government took control of that land during the war because they needed it, and then they never gave it back. And if they had given it back, your family now would have, have land worth £10 million. Would you want reparations for that? And the liars would say no. And I'd always say, you lie. Of course you would. It's completely natural. Equally in America, they're talking about reparations amongst the black community. It's like, if you built the wealth, if your forebears built the wealth of other people, and they're now worth millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, yet you didn't get that leg up. If your labor wasn't paid for and your work wasn't honored financially, and if it had have been, maybe 200 years ago, your family lineage could have started a path to wealth today. Anyone who says there shouldn't be some kind of recompense for that is just living in a la-la land. It seems so logical to me, and I work in logic a lot, and that's just like a complete logic. My ancestors, my forebears are owed their dues. Pay it to me today, please, and somehow.
Yeah, and not for nothing. It's because the people who are alive today, who are doing well by virtue of their forebears and the wealth that's accumulated intergenerationally. So it's not some esoteric metaphysical concept of an apology. It's like, no, it's real world justice. because you are where you are in life because of your forebears, and so am I.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's about literally trying to correct those things. And like the 1619 project, which is I don't know a huge amount about, but my understanding is it was like at least in part led by the New York Times in concert with some predominantly African American historians who have tried to correct the record in school curricula about what actually happened around the founding of America. And there's sort of a similar conversation happening in New Zealand at the moment about what actually is the truth of the foundation of our country and what happened in recent history. Like, man, that's so important. And there's been people who have been like, the 1619 project has got these gaps and it's got this wrong and this wrong. And it's very important to listen to those things, because if you're putting yourself out there as a authority on history and fact, you've got to do your research and stand by it. However, in the grand sweep of things, you compare what kids are taught right now about people like Christopher Columbus and the minor errors that the 1619 project are making, and it's like, man, we got to see the bigger picture here. You can't hold the 1619 project to this infallible standard of you can't get a single detail wrong, whereas the existing status quo history that kids are getting taught is very, very wrong, like hugely wrong, not just on the details, but on the whole kind of sweep of history about how it happened. And anyway,
the
you know what I'm saying?
And there's buzzwords at the moment in America like critical race theory, which is all the conversation at the moment, and people again are fighting against that. And I think, well, hang on, it's a logical thing. Critical race theory, and its most simplistic, and I know we may have a problem with being overly simplistic, says, the racist history of the past still impacts society today and has been inbred into some of the institutions today. That's sort of it. And people would say that's a load of bollocks. I go, well, okay, so let's say racism ended yesterday, literally yesterday. Would it still have an impact in society today? Of course. Well, what if it ended last week? What if it ended last month? Last year? Would it still impact society today? Yes, of course it would. To be able to go, well, we're done with that now, the line is drawn and it doesn't impact society anymore, it's just nonsense. I don't get how and why people fight against being honest about the past, being honest about how that's impacting the present, because it's not until you do that you can possibly then move forward, in a healthy and successful way for everybody. Well, maybe that's it. They don't want it to be for everybody. They want it to be just for them, and that's why they fight against it.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree, Pat. I want to ask you a question.
Go, man.
What was your favorite cartoon in the 90s?
I remember being at boarding school in the late 1980s going into 1990, and Saturday morning we'd be so we'd go to breakfast Saturday mornings.
What was breakfast, by the way, at the boarding school?
Anything you would think of, pretty plain. There'd be toast and cereals and that kind of stuff as well. A cooked item normally, like it'll be powdered, but eggs. And then on the occasion, you'd get like the sausages and the bacon and that kind of stuff. Very rare, but when you had those, there was lots of boys going back for seconds and thirds. Often weekend breakfasts were better than weekday breakfasts because a whole bunch of the boys went home in the weekends, so they might spend a little bit more dosh on food in the weekends. So we'd come home, we'd probably back to our rooms, get into our rugby gear, we'd all have our socks and stuff on, ready to go out to footy or whatever sport was the day. Watching, I can remember a program called Dungeons and Dragons. I can't remember too much more about it. I remember collecting and watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles when it first came out. That was probably early 90s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't actually.
Did I tell you about the pilot that we made for YouTube? I probably told you this the last appearance I made.
No, what was that? Is that based on that book that you wrote when you were at school about the Norse gods living in Wellington?
Holy shit, man! You've done your research. That was the only play I've ever written, The New Adventures of Hercules.
It sounded like a version of What We Do in the Shadows. That's vampires living in Wellington, when you had the Norse gods living in Wellington.
I think they're Greek, and also I think Taika went to my school, so I think he hitting on that. So I was at Onslow College, so someone can figure out if he was there at some point before me. It was. I got very bored in 7th form, so I decided to write and put on a play, and it was the thrust of it. I found the script like a couple of years ago, and I read through it. I was like, this is not bad. It was Hercules moves to Wellington and has to go to high school there because Zeus sees Lord of the Rings. This is during the height of Lord of the Rings tourism. Sees Lord of the Rings, falls in love with the landscape, moves him and Hera and Hercules down to Johnsonville, a very suburban part of Wellington, and everyone's having a bad time. Zeus's former credentials as a Greek god don't get recognized because he's from overseas, so he becomes a cab driver. So the god of gods is driving people around in cabs. Hercules is struggling his way through a new environment in high school and gets his first crush and gets punked on and all of this sort of thing. And Hera's desperately trying to make do in her new suburban surroundings. And it was, you know what? Not a bad play, I thought.
I think, as you're saying it, I think about those shorts that actually Taika made for Ragnarok, where Thor had flatmates in Australia, which were very funny shorts that they made. Anyway, I interrupted you. You were talking about something on YouTube.
Oh, yeah, true. Man, my train of thoughts are all over the shop. Worst Idea of All Time is the podcast that Guy and I have been doing for ages. Very early on, a guy in LA who was a big Hollywood agent started emailing us and was like, hey, I want to represent you boys in Hollywood. And I thought it was spam. I thought it was a scammer, so I just ignored them. But then it turned out he was real. So we teamed up with him and started pitching to TV networks. And eventually we got an offer from YouTube to make a series. And they gave us like a pretty big budget to make a pilot where we lived in a sewer for a week. And you were speaking about method acting before. We invented a technique called method reviewing, where you've got to enter the world of the film to properly review it. So we lived in a sewer for a week and watched Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles out of the ooze 3 times a day for 5 days. And we could eat nothing but pizza. And it was a good time. And unfortunately, the series didn't get picked up because YouTube thought it was too weird to be commercially viable. But we've since released it ourselves because our producers held on to it for a while. They were pitching it to other networks, but eventually gave up. So like, yeah, do whatever you want. So we just put it up online and people love it.
What's it called?
It's if you just look up Worst Idea of All Time pilot, it's on YouTube. But it was interesting. We had a whole series mapped out. We were going to go and watch Titanic while we were living on a cargo ship.
Since the dawn of cinema, filmmakers have committed their minds, bodies, and souls to their art.
There we go.
Reviewers, on the other hand, are a bunch of feckless dickheads who walk around getting paid millions of dollars telling the rest of us what to think.
We are method film reviewers.
We follow in the footsteps of method actors like Daniel Day-Lewis and Lincoln.
So if you're method film reviewers and you're in the sewer because of the sewer movie, what other? Surely you must have had a list of things you would have done.
Titanic on a cargo ship.
Yep.
We were going to go to an island off the coast of Fiji and do Castaway. I can't remember the others, but we had like a whole season mapped out, and it was going to be tremendous.
Once Were Warriors, where would you do that one?
I would not know.
No, okay.
At this time, maybe certain bits of Christchurch, based on when I was there as a kid. I know that Black Power had a pretty significant presence in the neighborhood where I grew up. I don't know.
Mind you, Emmanuel, how would you do with Emmanuel?
Emmanuel, this is the beautiful thing about that series, set all around the world. Every film takes place in like 5 different countries.
Right.
It's like the franchise, but obviously a little worse. That's
really interesting. So does that have any legs? Like one day it might get picked up. It's a good idea. So you basically, I had an idea to do a show once. Funnily enough, was going to call it 7 Days, and it was spending 7 days in, doing thing X, 7 days in prison, 7 days on, those weird religious people on the West Coast and that kind of stuff, and doing like a week embedded in these areas. It's kind of, it feels like it has that kind of version to it. It's not that you're embedded in, but you're making yourself a part of it.
Big time. Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that immersion thing, because it's what a lot of TV doesn't do. It visits something for 20 minutes and then it's like, here's this thing. And they get it wrong because they haven't spent the time. But you got to spend a week in something. That 7 days idea sounds good, Pat. Why didn't you? You pitched it around and people weren't interested? Was it too expensive as a production?
A little bit. I mean, I really like the idea of doing the prison one. You're like, I really thought but there was always a lot of, if you're going to do it properly, there's a lot of danger attached to it. But I guess it was one of those things. I mean, I'm...
Be homeless for a week. Imagine that.
Yeah.
Because, they do that charity drive where famous New Zealanders, I think, sleep on the street overnight.
Sleep in a car park normally on something. So, yeah.
Exactly. But if you were legitimately like, a rough sleeper for a week, can I say this as well? The conversations that I have with rough sleepers around are like the nicest conversations I have with anyone. There's some good ass people out there that were doing it hard.
It's in Dunedin. It's interesting living in Dunedin because obviously I spent most of my life in Auckland, moved to Dunedin, and obviously because of the climate, like I woke up this morning, it was -1. The rough sleeper is not quite as prevalent, but they are still around. And I used to work at radio on Friday nights in central Auckland. I'd do a shift from 7 till midnight on the hits. Then I'd go do ZB from midnight till 6 a.m. Then I'd go do Easy Mix from 6 a.m. till 10 a.m. All in a row, 3 in a row. It was great fun.
Oh, shit.
And I'd always obviously probably eat a couple of meals during that timetable. And there was always people sleeping up by the dairy just around the corner from the radio stations. And I'd always go in, not always, I don't want to try and sell it like I'm some kind of fucking prince, but just get food. Have a chat with them. Are you hungry? Yep, I'm hungry. Go and get a pie for dinner, bring another one out, give it to them. And you're right, the conversations are always so, maybe because there's no pretense, maybe when you strip away and you make someone vulnerable enough that they live in the street, they're authentic and genuine, real conversations, maybe. You can't be very full of pride if you're living on the street, can you?
Yeah, maybe that is what it is. I don't know, you're not making any attempts to protect too much status around you or that kind of thing. You've sort of dropped that away. Yeah.
Hey, I've got a question for you.
I'd love a question, Pat.
As a comedian, stand-up comedian, a tour coming up shortly, which we'll talk about in a tick.
I forgot about that.
You forgot about that. We have officially started the podcast, by the way. The government looking at this new legislation around hate speech. Has that been a conversation amongst the comedian community? Because often those people up on stage saying those things that they don't actually believe, but they're funny, is one of those areas I wonder if that conversation around, what could and couldn't be deemed dodgier in the future. Have you heard any chats? Has there been people talking about it?
I apologize for not being a Gold Star guest, but I genuinely am so tuned out to that conversation. I do not know really much about that, even the proposed law, which is bad. I'm very ignorant to it, but I will say this: I'm ignorant by virtue of, in my experience, no one in the comedy community is talking about it at all.
Yeah. Well, that's actually.
I've been gigging a lot at the moment. No, I mean, it hasn't come up. I mean, I was hanging out with Brendan Lovegrove last night, who I love to bits, but I would say he's probably among the more likely candidates for that to be a topic of conversation. If for no other reason than, to his credit, like Lovegrove really has his finger on the pulse most of the time. Like, he knows what's going on. And it didn't come up in conversation whatsoever.
But that in of itself is an answer. It's like, so comedians aren't talking about it, not worried about it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, well, that's the answer. Yeah. In my experience, it hasn't come up. It's not an area of concern. So you take me through, Pat, because I imagine as a broadcaster, in the talkback realm, this is probably an intense area of interest for you. I don't even know what the proposed law is. Like, what are they?
So the Royal Commission came out post the Christchurch massacre, and there were 60 recommendations, and one of the group of recommendations was around hate speech, bringing in new laws to make hate speech more prosecutable, if that is a word. And if you want to find out about it, you can have a look at like News Hub from last Sunday morning. There's an interview between the Justice Minister and Tova O'Brien, and
I hear that didn't go so well for the Justice Minister.
So basically, he's come out saying speech that is designed, speech that is made that could incite hatred towards a group of people is what they're what they're looking at. I've got to be careful because this is still in the kind of submission stage. So there's no laws being put in place yet, but the submissions then turn into the laws, And Tova was quite clever, whether you love her or hate her, that she was saying, so if millennials all were talking about how much they hate and want to see all the boomers die because they've ruined our housing markets. Is that it? And he basically had to admit that on some level, at some stage, depending on how the law was passed, that could be applied to, he didn't say that she had to pull it out of him, but basically could be applied as hate speech, you know. And there's obvious ones like, you know, she asked about Laurel Hubbard and that kind of thing as well. And the concerning thing is, and this is what I've said all the way through, I actually had on yesterday morning, I put it up yesterday afternoon, a former lawyer for the ACLU in America who defended the Nazis in the 1970s. He defended their right to free speech. So he's a free speech purist. And I had him on yesterday morning. We talked a bit about this overall proposed law. And the point that I've been making all the way through was it just comes down to it depends who decides what's hate speech. You know, because that in and of itself is the crux of it. And what are the consequences to that? And, you know, I had a conversation with someone on my Facebook page the other day, and he's a very left-leaning kind of guy, and he was all fine with the idea and thought I was being a bit of a drama queen hosting this conversation. And I said to him, would you be happy with, say, David Seymour deciding what hate speech was? And the point I was trying to make is it depends where you are on the political spectrum and where you are in life as to what you're comfortable with and then not comfortable with. Whereas if you don't have that purity of freedom of speech, then there's always strings attached which are going to catch up some people and somehow. And it's just, you know, hate speech laws in the UK, there's an example of a 19-year-old girl who tweeted out Snoop Dogg lyrics. Just the lyrics, nothing else. She got done for hate speech because I'm assuming it had the N-word in it. But she was done for hate speech for tweeting out lyrics to a song. Nothing else, no opinion, no just the lyrics, because that's how their law is written. And she has a conviction for hate speech. So I'm concerned by it depending on where it goes, but I'm also aware that we're in our initial stages, so I'm not going to have a big song and dance about it.
As a general rule, like I'm not a huge fan of I don't really trust governments very much with everything. They're very good at some stuff, but I don't know, this feels like an area where it's a real shame that we have to sort of resort. It feels like it should be an area of last resort that you have to move speech into the criminal realm and in government. I guess we had a very unique, huge example where we, saw the very worst case scenario. So we're trying to figure out how to avoid that ever happening again and what we can do to sort of heal and progress and move on from that. So this is a response to that. But yeah, it's a shame because I suspect that, having government decide what hate speech is probably in my estimation, isn't the way to go.
Yeah.
It just seems too fallible, right? Too changeable.
I just think, and I know that this is going to be a bit naive saying it like this because there's always exceptions to the rule, but I just think in general, the best response to bad, hateful speech is good, loving speech, is the opposite and more of it.
I used to think that, and I used to say that, and then I think I saw the experience of Trump get elected, and I'm like, oh fuck, maybe that thesis is incorrect.
Yeah, but you wouldn't want Trump and his followers to then decide what hate speech was. Equally, you wouldn't want the point that the lawyer David Goldberger made yesterday was, the importance of defending the NRA and their right for speech at the moment in America, even though he was a left-wing himself, left-wing. But the importance of defending their right to speech is next week, hypothetically, those same rules will be applied to a far left group who wants to defend their right to speech. So and so that's why it's the concerns around who and what, because typically you'll find
I think in that debate though, there is a point where you cross over a line and you go, well, it's kind of too hard, so you're almost ignoring that it exists by saying I don't want to trust anyone to be able to. This happens a lot in the law and with government getting in control of stuff. It's like by going, if we make any single mistake, it will, elucidate the fact that, or it will illuminate rather the fact that mistakes can be made and these institutions are fallible. Therefore, they should not be charged with any power to try and make change or make good in society. It's like, yes, things will go wrong. Things always go wrong. Whenever there is power afforded to a group of people or a person, they'll fuck up somewhere along the way. But is there a net benefit in having a hate speech law? Maybe there is.
Well, I actually think it's quite easy. I really do think it's quite easy, and this is the crux of it, is if it can be tangibly and literally connected to action, then criminalize it. Tweeting out Snoop Dogg lyrics, nothing else, is not a tangible connection to a hate crime or a incite. It doesn't incite violence.
See, that's generational, I think, because I'm going to put us in the same generation, Pat. I reckon we roughly are. Are you an Xer?
Yeah.
Or are you a millennial?
Yeah, X.
You're an Xer? So I'm a millennial, but I'll put us in the same bucket. I think the generation coming up from us have a different definition of violence and harm. And it's like a bit more encompassing, that it can include sort of emotional, generational trauma and.
That's one of the problems. People who say speech is violence, that's one of the problems, because then you can be accused of being violent to someone. By words that you use.
It's a problem because it doesn't meet our definition of what violence is. But there's a generation coming up that, and I don't want to misattribute stuff to Zoomers that is actually incorrect, but there's a lot of Zoomers that believe that speech can be violent, and like maybe they're right. Maybe that's the next evolution of thought that we need to go down to improve society.
You're talking about Zoomers. I don't want to now sound like a boomer, but for me, there's a big part that I was having this conversation with someone a wee while ago. I can't remember what we were kind of toing and froing, and he went, "Look, I'm just perfectly happy with my definition of what that means." And I went, "You don't get to choose what something means. You don't get to choose the definition of a word for your own sake. When it's a very, words have meanings, and the word violence, and I just brought it up, behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. So to say words are violence, I mean."
But words can hurt. I mean, even by that, if you're going to go, it's by the dictionary, which is,
physical force is in there.
Oh, sorry. Okay, gotcha. Right.
Physical force is a part of it. And look, I'm not trying to say this to stir up a Twitter feud with anyone, but
sure.
Speech. And
you're not denying the fun of it, but you're saying that violence should be, curtailed around that current definition that involves a physical element.
Violence is violence, and speech is not violence. I mean, it's weird. I kind of hesitated in saying that, but I don't need to. Speech is not violence. Speech can cause violence. Let's go fuck them up. Speech can cause violence, but speech in and of itself is not violent. And I think that's the line of demarcation. If the speech made causes violence, if there's a direct line, and there are troubles with that. I mean, like the January 6th thing in America, they were talking about fighting. They used the word fighting. Fighting is a difficult word because, someone who has cancer is fighting cancer, but they're not physically hitting it. So I think the threshold has to be high, has to be very clear that it's inciting violence towards a group of people, because I have a concern that what we're getting to, and actually in that interview with the Justice Minister, I've got my notes here from my podcast, so I won't go find them though. He actually talked at one stage about, people being offended as a part of this. Now, I said in the podcast yesterday, and I'll say it again, I think he probably misspoke, because I don't think he'd say if you're offended, you can't come under hate law. But he did in that interview talk about people being offended as a part of this legislation. And I'm like, no, I don't want to offend anyone. It's not my intention, but I also know that nearly everything you say, and this is why I was asking about comedians on stage, could offend someone.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Okay, so from a personal point of view, I guess, and this isn't what you're supposed to do when you're on podcasts and radio shows of the like, is I'm very prepared to, you know what it is? Psychedelic drugs have taught me to walk through life confidently, stride through, but always be very open to the fact that you could be wrong, kind of about anything in a way. And I think that all of the movements that I'm a big fan of, all of the major activism that I've seen in my life, which has led to major positive change, has been driven from an activated younger generation who have really pushed the definitions of things and forced older people to think about things that they took as a given. So I guess I'm just very open to being wrong in what I think is, my worldview at the moment. From the comedian angle, and this potentially won't win me any friends, in the country, but I genuinely think we do have a very left-leaning comedy scene here. I mean, all comedy scenes internationally, generally speaking, are left-leaning.
Yeah.
And I sort of have a sense for why, but I also am sort of interested by why that's the case. I'm definitely like a very left-leaning person myself. But I would love to see a bit of a broader spectrum of views represented in the New Zealand and the international comedy community, but especially the New Zealand comedy community. I think there's definitely space for, like respectful disagreement and just having different points of view on stuff. But I also acknowledge the fact that it's coming from a place where like I don't have a lot of skin in the game in some ways, like I'm a straight white dude in his 30s who's building a house in Onehunga, I'm just fine.
I think the words you're saying are exactly the correct words in my opinion as well. I like when you're talking about Judith Collins people before that, you don't basically hold it against them if they're Judith Collins supporters. And at that point, I jotted down ACLU based on this guy I spoke to yesterday. But what's happening in society is groups and organisations are picking sides. So this organisation, the ACLU, who defended Nazis in the 1970s, who defended the NRA at the moment, if you go to their website, it looks like, and it's not a criticism, I'm just saying it looks like a lobby group for left-wing causes. This guy who was getting an award, the David Goldberger, the lawyer I spoke to, was getting an award for the work he had done, said he was concerned because basically at his awards ceremony, there were speeches being made by current ACLU lawyers talking about how, right-wing views should not be getting defended by the ACLU. So there is a shift, whereas I agree with you. That's why one of the reasons, and I don't mean to sound like a victim here, because it's not, I'm fine with it. One of the reasons that this podcast maybe hasn't done as well as it could have is because I don't leave blood on the ground and I talk to everybody. And so when I talk to everybody like a Megan Murphy of this world who, got banned from Twitter for saying men aren't women, I still wanted to hear her story. Well, now according to some people, I'm a right-wing lunatic transphobe. And because they label you and then you're done and you're dead to them. And in this current society we live in, people are pretty quick to throw people away and throw people out. And I think that what you're talking about is where we have been, but I don't think that's where society is right now.
I mean, I'm talking specifically about my personal ideal, so I'm just speaking for myself around that stuff. But, there's also, I think there's been an evolution of thought and an exposure to the real harms of what has come before us, that you can't deny that words have power and your actions have power. And
agreed.
The whole platforming thing is really interesting. I genuinely I'm confused as to where I come down on that, because on the one hand, I do tend to agree that you want to hear from everyone, because I personally think I've got a pretty good bullshit detector, and I've kind of got the confidence of my convictions to be like, I want to hear what that person has to say because I think they're dumb as shit, and I want to hear them out because I don't know, maybe it might change my view, but I'm pretty confident I can, think for myself and sort of discern where I'm going to land on this, even if I'm talking to someone who thinks a different way than I do, and they're quite, skillful in their speech. I still would hope that I've got enough strength of my convictions to be able to, hear the other side out. But there's this whole thing about platforming people where it's it is that there are real effects of hosting quite outrageous ideas and speech, and harmful and bigoted speech on, certain platforms, that it sort of spreads the word on it. So I don't know. I'm very torn on it. I genuinely don't know where I come down on it.
I think as well, the idea about hearing voices like you've just talked about, hearing people's opinions, is it gives you the information yourself. I'm very much about I want to hear people's stories myself. I want to decide. It reminds me of, and I'm sure you know the details around the famous lawsuit that someone took against McDonald's for their coffee being too hot and it burnt them. And everyone goes, oh, frivolous lawsuits. But if you actually look into the story of that, it's and you look at the whole thing, that this person had third-degree burns because the coffee was so hot, and McDonald's has been challenged numerous times before about lowering the temperature of their coffee, and other people have been getting burnt, and the industry was saying this is not how this should be working. You guys are doing this wrong, and they wouldn't change it. And the only reason they got to change it was someone sued them.
And if you look at the history of the public relations as an industry, you also probably start to connect the dots that whole thing about, frivolous lawsuit, this woman sued McDonald's, was probably a public relations campaign by McDonald's.
Yeah. So when
probably professional communicators putting it into the zeitgeist that, look at this outrageous woman who got a hot cough, and then it was hot, and then she sued McDonald's.
So, but when you
probably paid by the corporation.
But when you go to the source and you hear it for yourself, and you can be informed that way, I really enjoy that. Now, that opens me up to being perhaps hearing some stuff that other people don't want to hear, or sharing some stuff that other people don't want to hear shared. And I look, Billy TK, for example, I stayed away from at the last election. I chose to not air his views. So I'm not like saying, I'm going to be putting out their neo-Nazi propaganda anytime soon. Not that was what Billy TK was, for clarity, in case he's feeling litigious. But what I'm saying is, in general, I like the idea of speech. I like the idea of being able to talk to people who I disagree with as much as I talk to people who I agree with.
100%. It would be really cool if, I don't know, if we just were armed with enough critical thinking faculties early enough. Maybe we need more attention on that. I think it's a really important skill to be able to teach people. And you can do it from a really young age of just what is bullshit and what is true and what are people's motivations, I think is the big thing. You go, who's telling you this and what skin have they got in the game?
True.
I still want to hear what Billy TK has to say because it sounds interesting because he sounds insane.
Have you seen the documentary on Stuff?
Oh, yeah, I did. I watched, I think, the interview that who did he sit down with?
Paula Penfold.
Yes, who I freaking love.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Second to none in this country. So, is she platforming Billy TK?
Well, she didn't cancel him, but she put it out there. I mean, but this is the point. I use this example. I had Kim Vanell on from Al Jazeera not long ago, and she was about, I don't want to mischaracterize her, but she was a little bit about being careful as to what we share. But that documentary was exactly the point. Stuff.co.nz and Paula Penfold did a documentary on him. They showed his views, they shared it, and then people were able to see that this person is maybe not the best person to be supporting. And I think fully it could have been one of the contributing factors to keep him out of government. So actually putting that speech out there was, I think, something positive for the community, even though it was kind of abhorrent speech.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example.
When there's a lot of people who are getting behind a movement, to shut your eyes to it is problematic unto itself.
Yeah.
Know what I mean? To just ignore it and be like, oh no, that guy's crazy. It's like, well, what is he actually saying? I don't know.
Yeah.
Haven't read with it because he's cancelled. It's like, well, I don't know if that's super useful either.
Yeah.
Because then it continues to spread and metastasize. Here's another question for you, Pat.
All right, go.
Best donut you've ever eaten in your whole life?
Oh, dude, I have to say it's not a donut, but there was a small window about 5 or 6 or 7 years ago where the cronut came out. It seems to have disappeared.
Yeah.
Those were amazing.
Where did they go?
I don't know, but they were amazing.
Yeah. You could bring it back, some second wave cronut operation. What would be your twist on it that could justify it having a second life now?
I don't know. Put something else in it, like a chocolate sauced cronut or something. Make it a bit more. They were perfect though. Those things. I tell you what, my favorite donut is always those. You buy those little ones from places and they go along the little oil thing and they flip them over and they come straight into you and they just put sugar on them and they're hot in the bag. Those ones, they're pretty damn good.
I know, at like a fairground or something.
Yeah. They're pretty amazing.
Yeah. Oh, they're the shit.
Yeah.
But you've got to eat them hot. They're like a McDonald's cheeseburger because they do not stand cooling down even a little bit. And there's no bringing them once they've cooled off. It's deep fryer food, eh? It's good for a minute and a half. And if you don't eat it in the window, it's fucked.
Yeah, which means you can't get big bags of them. You have to get small bags. So by the time you get to the bottom, they're still hot.
Yeah. It's true.
I like how we talk about news and politics and then we go, what's your favorite donut? It's completely the next question. It's out of there. I like it.
I think it's critical. That's the human experience, man. Sometimes we're reckoning with our own existence and mortality and whether or not we're living in a simulation. And then other times we're watching MasterChef. Both are important.
Hey, we've been talking for a shitload of time. We should probably tell people why you why you came on. There was the things that we've got your a tour coming up. Have you actually started the tour now, or are you about to start the tour? July the 8th.
Some ways a continuation. I did the comedy festival in May, which is Auckland and Wellington, and I'm bringing that festival show to the South Island. So Littleton on the 8th of July, and then Christchurch the next night, Dunedin on the 10th of July, and then Queenstown on the 11th. It's going to be a lot of fun. And if you want to come and see it, you can get tickets at timbat.co.nz, and Bat has 2 P's.
I'd be interested to know. 10 p.m. I see it's on at 10 p.m. in Dunedin. That's quite a late start. What's the rationale behind that?
I booked it very late in the piece, and the Raw comedy competition is happening beforehand, which I think I'm going to help judge, I believe. So I'm going to do, I think that's the 8 o'clock show, and then I'm going to jump on after that. Plus, I think the ABs are playing that night, so I've accidentally nailed it because I'm pretty sure kickoff is 7 p.m. So you can watch the game and then come to my show.
Right. That sounds like fun. Yeah, that's a really good idea, actually, if the ABs are playing, because they'll be finished 9:30. People can rock up. You might have a few rocking up just after you. Maybe you could do that. You know how performers say, we're going to start at 10, but really it's 10:15.
Well, you can't do that as easily with a festival show. But I will try. I will try and kick it out a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah, you're right. I could have steamed footy fans.
But surely there's no one after you, eh? That'll be the last show of the day.
Actually, you did right. At that time, no one's after me. Yeah, 100%. But it's a good show, guys. And I don't often say that about my own work, but you know, it's not perfect, but it's I've been doing the comedy festival. I've done a brand new show in the comedy festival for 9 years in a row.
Wow.
It would be 10 if COVID hadn't cancelled it last year. But I've done a brand new hour for the last 9 years now. And I would probably say this is my best show that I've done.
So why don't you have 9 specials out then? Because if it's a brand new hour and you put it to bed afterwards.
There's a different bar between, like, you know, having something exist in a live space and committing it to celluloid or ones and zeros to exist forever.
Yeah.
I would love to film a special at some point, but it'll be a bit better than this one, which is already pretty good. I've
talked to other comedians about that here in New Zealand, and it doesn't seem, in this day and age, you know, when I'm not sure what you're doing, but I'm looking into a 4K camera and stuff right now, and the barrier to entry seems to be so much less than what it was, say, 20 years ago, to be able to produce something. I wonder why, you know, we see them coming out of America left, right, and centre through things like Netflix, but I wonder why we don't have more of them coming out from our kind of local Kiwi guys.
I'm so with you. I've been yelling at everyone who cares to listen for a long time that we need to film more of our stand-up. I mean, I've been kind of interested in amateur videography and filming people doing their comedy, and film myself doing my comedy for a couple of years now. So I'm a bit of a gun for hire in that respect. But yeah, I love doing stuff like that. And you're right. We absolutely need to be recording more of our stand-up and putting it out online. Even if it's not for a special, just clips. Just get stuff on YouTube and TikTok and whatnot. And I went viral on TikTok. Did you see that?
No, what happened there?
I put so I got a spot on the gala at Christmas time last year.
Yep.
And sort of specifically, you know, created a set that was three distinct jokes, so I could cut it up into 3 1.5 minute bits. Mm-hmm. Put one of them on TikTok, and it went fucking crazy. And like 3 million people have watched it.
Wow.
But yeah.
I only use my TikTok to put my puppy on there. That's why my TikTok's there. That's about it. I don't. What kind
of puppy do you have?
Border Collie.
Oh, the best.
Border Collie named Nala. Do you want to see?
They shed though.
She's kind of mid-range hair. Is that the right thing? Mid-range. Yep. She's not long hair. She's not short hair. I'll take you.
Is she mixed with something else then?
No, she's a pure.
Wow.
But she's a good one. Like, she's not unfortunately, but she's smart. Oh, there's something from a wee while ago. This is not what she looks like now. But that's her. After she's been washed, she decides to go nutter.
You can't go wrong with a little pup.
Yeah. So.
What a dog.
Yeah, so that's her. There we go. There's a photo of her.
How cute. Colour too.
Yeah, she's a good one. She's smart. She's too smart. She just figured out how to jump over the fence yesterday, so fucking I'm worried about that. But you can buy doorbells for dogs, and they're like just long chains with bells on them. And I was going to teach you to ring it to go outside, but she's just started doing it herself. So she'll...
Oh, just make yourself outside.
Yeah, like I taught her... We tried to teach her, say, 3 months ago, and then we kind of let it go. But now she's just walking up to the ranch slider, and she's hitting her head into it, and it goes, dingle, dingle. Okay, cool. Open up the door for her. So she's taught herself that if she hits that with her head, she's going to get to go outside. So, yeah, she's a good one.
They're good problem solvers, those border collies.
Yeah, dude. Hey,
let's keep them occupied.
Yeah, no, we're lucky we have a dog park just down the road from us that we're at quite a lot with her, at least once a day, if not twice sometimes. Let's do this again real quick. Littleton, the 8th of July at Wonderbar. Christchurch, the 9th of July at Good Times. Dunedin, the 10th of July at the new, I don't know how to say that, Athenaeum Theatre. And
I think you nailed it.
Did I? And Queenstown, the 11th of July at the Crown. Tim Batt, Batt with 2 T's, .co.nz for more information. And we'll do our best to get along and check you out when you come into Dunedin, that's for sure. And people of Dunedin, even if it's a rugby night, we make sure we get out there and support. Because I feel like kind of, the reason people come through Dunedin or through any city, but I'm in Dunedin, is to sell tickets and stuff. And the reason people will come back is if they sell enough. So we need to support it to have the opportunity to see people like Tim Batt in the future.
I love Dunedin.
Yeah.
I genuinely do. Really cool town. And my wife, because she's a doctor, spent a lot of time in Dunedin, obviously studying at Otago, and she loves it too. So, we're big fans of you guys. Don't you worry about that.
Well, then we'll be big fans of you on the, 10th of July.
Sounds right. I thought you were going to throw it to me, and I'm glad you didn't, because I can't remember what dates of which.
No, that's why I look that way.
I'll see you beautiful people of Te Waiponamu very soon.
All right.
Next week. That's scary.
All right, Tim. All the best, dude. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Pat.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on, man. It's been a pleasure. It's nice to hang out with you.
I think we're done.